Hey guys, welcome back to Mondays at the Museum. I'm Carrie and I'm here at the Anna Bemis Palmer Museum in York, Nebraska. So for today's episode, we're going to be talking about the history of McCool Junction, and I'm just going to get the highlights because it's got a lot of really cool history. And then I'm going to give you a tour of the McCool section of our History of York County display. So let's get to it. McCool Junction had a fair bit of controversy when it first started. Apparently, there was already a town in the area called Niota, Niota. I'm not quite sure about the pronunciation, but that's what I'm going with. So that town was already established, and people wanted to build a railroad there, but then the railroad did the survey, and they chose this guy named Klinsman's land instead, and people were not happy, and it was a whole feud thing and like a rivalry. And eventually they came together and got over it. But apparently, quite a bit of controversy when they first started. This was around 1887. So March of 1887 is when McCool Junction officially got its start. However, it was actually plotted out in 1886, but because of a really severe winter, nothing could be done until it got warmer. So again, this is on land owned by a guy named Louis Klinsman. Now, the town itself was named after the general manager of the Kansas City and Omaha Railroad. Big surprise, right? Daniel McCool. So many of our towns are named after railroad guys, and it's just kind of funny because this is a two-parter. So McCool came from Daniel McCool, and Junction came because it was literally a railroad junction on the south side of town. There was a southwest fork that went to Fairfield, and then there was a southeast fork that went to Fairbury and Fairmont. There's a lot of fairs. We're going with it. Anyway, so McCool from Daniel McCool, who was the general manager of the railroad, and then Junction because it was a junction. Also, they couldn't just call it McCool because I guess it got mistaken for McCook, too similar. So we're going with it. So, okay, March 1887, right? Now, by June 1st, there were already 75 buildings established. Now, this is residents and businesses, but that is just ridiculous. And then by 1900, the population was already 276. Now, fun facts about McCool. McCool's nickname was the Magic City on the Blue, and this was like the town of the future, right? All the cool stuff. It was the prettiest. It had the nicest stuff, and the opportunities were endless. And they planned for like 2,000 people to live here. Eventually, things faded over time, but the 75 buildings in only a few months is just ridiculous. So during that time, there were several trains that came through, both freight and passenger. There was even a roundhouse built at one point to hold the extra engines because of a lot of traffic, and you know railroad means traffic, which means money, which means a lot of people. The first bank in town was started by a guy named Henry Musselman. It was called the Blue River Bank. Remember this? This was in 1887. It was taken over by a guy named George Post, which, if you watched last week's episode, you know Post and Gresham, same guy. And then after him came Charles McLeod, which again, previous episode we definitely talked about the McLeod family. Other fun facts. May 20th, 1887, the first newspaper was printed. It was called The Record. A couple owners later changed it to the Blue Valley Journal, which again, remember that name. Other things in town, they had a racetrack on the north side. It was just a really pretty area. There were a lot of parks, there were a lot of trees, there were a lot of flowers. They would host picnics, there were parades, there were parties, there was all sorts of stuff. And it was such a joyous place that apparently pranks abounded. And one such was this guy named Frank. This is on Halloween, right? He ended up helping some guys push his own wagon into the river because it was so dark he didn't even recognize his own vehicle. I bet that was a fun morning for him. The first lights in town were actually gasoline lighted, but in the spring of 1907, they bought this special electric light engine, and then it was purchased, and then they installed it. And they said, like, when the installer was working, they brought the band in, and he, like, serenaded him while he was working, and, like, when the lights were turned on, the band started playing, and it was a whole spectacle. So just think like that kind of town. Just think of what you think of, like, the feelings for that kind of town. Just feelings abounded in the very beginning of McCool. It was a really cool place. A lot of fires took place in the early years. Really sad story. They destroyed a lot of the wood building. Like, a lot of architecture was gone and never rebuilt. And if it was rebuilt, it was built with bricks instead of wood. Dr. Frank Morris, who you're going to see a photo of later, he served as a physician there for 50 years. He started in 1887, right when they started, and he worked until he passed away in 1937. Which is just crazy to me. So now I'm going to take you to the tour of our McCool Junction section of the History of York County display. Okay, so here's the McCool Junction section as a whole. Here is a high school diploma from McCool High School. So it is from May of 1921. It is for Eleanor Stark. Also here, you have the souvenir here from the M.E. Boren and Company Hardware and Furniture Store. McCool Junction. This looks like a prom wine glass, except, you know, not for wine because it's prom. Today's dreams, tomorrow's memories. That looks like something that I got at my prom. These are all sitting on top of a section of the Blue River Bank, that same Blue River Bank that was built right away in the 1880s. Now, this is just a section of it. I do have quite the bank counter. I've got the whole counter. I've got the bars on the windows. I've got cupboards. I've got safe doors. I've got all sorts of stuff that goes for this bank. We just did a portion of it, one, for space because we wanted to include other items, and two, because this is unfortunately under the short side, the short ceiling, so I couldn't do the whole thing. Next time we set it up, we're going to do it on the north side, which is much taller. So a portion of the counter of the Blue River Bank. And to go with that, we have this picture here of R.F. Lord. He was a longtime cashier there. He worked there for so long that actually his wife even started working there as assistant cashier, which is kind of cool. And next to that, we have a Blue River Bank. So this is a map of York County. It is from 1916. Super old there, but in great shape for over 100 years old. Next to all the bank stuff is a copy of the Blue Valley Journal from 1939. Lots of cool local notes there, people moving to the area, people having babies, people passing away, stuff like that. Then there's this really cool paper that features a lot of really cool old-timey photos of like Town Square and the school. The grain elevators, they were the first buildings built like right around the same time as the office of that doctor there. But really cool old-timey photos. And right below that is this chamber pot. Funny story about that. When I found it, I sent a picture of it to my boss and I said, "Wearing extra gloves today." She's like, "I don't get it." And I had to explain, what people did before indoor plumbing, and her response was like, "Oh my God, throw that away," No, it was pretty clean. There was a dead spider inside, but that's about it. Here we have a mantle clock. It is a Gilbert 1807 mantle clock. It was a wedding present for people that got married at the McCool Junction Church. Joshua and Jean Bors, they got married in 1935. Here we have a camera from 1947. It's an Argo Flex camera with a brown leather carrying case. If you were here for our art display, you saw it. We did show all our vintage cameras during that time. And they are sitting on a case featuring a lot of fossils. So there's a gravel pit outside of McCool Junction, and a lot of these were dug out of there, so you can see bison, mammoth, buffalo, mastodon, all sorts of really cool fossils. And also on this table, this is my favorite McCool item. So it's a journal. It was found in Roy Stewart's estate. I don't know who wrote it. You assume him, but it could have been anybody. But it's really cool because it goes from like 1907 to 1937, and it's like, notes when people died, or like railroad section house burned down, or first frost of the season. There's even stuff in here about the Lindbergh baby. It's just kind of crazy. And then these historical books are where I got a lot of my information for today. So here's the Centennial book from 1987, and then the Golden Anniversary book from 1937. Also in the McCool section, we have a couple of yearbooks. The one on the left is from 1948. The one on the right is from 1955. And above that, we've got Mr. Frank Morris, MD. So that's that doctor that served for 50 years. He practiced his whole life there. And he did pass away in 1937, so he practiced all the way until he passed away. Above him is a picture of the school circa 1913, so pretty old there. And then the final item in the McCool section is this really cool wedding suit. So it belonged to Marjorie Norquist, and she wore it on her wedding to Delbert Norquist. They got married April 26, 1953 at the First Evangelical Lutheran Church in McCool. I think it's in really great shape. So that's the highlights of McCool history, as well as a tour of the McCool section. Tune in next week when we talk about Waco, Nebraska. We'll see you then.